right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's episode 58 of the Blowback Roundtable. We've got a full panel this morning. Ben, my co-host, as always, from Paich, Hungary. Carlo from Washington, D.C. Ian from suburb in Moscow. And Leo is joining us from Berlin. Correct, sir? Berlin. Okay, here we go.
With a black screen.
He's more than just a floating head, even though it looks like he's just a floating head. So before we get into everything, Leo, being in Berlin, is experiencing rolling blackouts and no heating. So he's got no light and he's all bundled up. But you're just doing that to save money. Like, you could actually turn the power on if you wanted to, but you're just
in my studio I like to keep it dark. I mean, yeah, but we are trying to save on heating costs. And your exaggeration, I mean, it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but things are getting pretty bad. Strikes this week again. The S-Bahn, the national train, is on strike for a week, another week, and next week
public transportation.
That's the national train.
Okay.
So like it's a big deal because people cannot get to work who live in a different city, or it makes also congestion in the automobile traffic. And next week is the U-Bahn on strike. The underground will be also on strike. It's just one after another.
Leo, before we begin, do you have farmer strikes? Because I haven't seen Germany a lot this week. I've seen Brussels, I've seen Spain, especially Poland, but Germany as well?
We absolutely do. There was 5,000 tractors that shut down the main road leading up to the Reichstag.
Okay. Wow, yeah. That seems to be everywhere now. Amazing stuff. And
absolutely.
Leo has a chicken in the oven, so I'm hoping it's a coal-fired oven?
No, it's not a coal-fired oven. It's a regular oven, electricity.
Okay, cool.
But yeah, the farmers' subsidies were cut. The subsidies were put in place in order to make it possible for the farmers in the Imperial Core to compete with farmers of the Global South, which make much cheaper things. So those subsidies have been in place ever since imperialism, I think, ever since the 60s or something like that, these subsidies for farmers. And then later it increased. But the German media, of course, reports it as Corona help.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. They say like the subsidies were given to the farmers for Corona, and now they've been taken away. And these ungrateful, spoiled farmers are complaining about their Corona package being taken away after the pandemic is already over. That's how they're spinning it. It's absolutely disgusting.
So we entitled our show this morning the Charlemagne Division. So that's a reference to, kind of the biggest news in Europe and, basically everywhere. Who would like to explore this story and tell everyone about exactly how it went down?
Why don't you take it?
Go ahead, Ian. Go.
Why don't you give a synopsis of it, and I'll give my opinion. I think you're better at synopsises.
Me or Ben?
I just wanted to give the summary of the Charlemagne Division, and then you could take it away, which comes from Maria Zakharova's response. And that was an SS division in occupied France, Vichy France, in 1944. And it was one of the last divisions to guard Germany, to guard the Führer's bunker against the Red Army. So I thought that was a cool reference. One of the reasons we picked the title. Take it away, Ian.
So there's been a couple different snafus. There's this one that you're referencing with Margot, saying that there was a 45-minute conversation with the Germans talking about attacking the Crimean Bridge with Taurus missiles.
That's fresh. That's today's news.
Yes, that's fresh. And then there's the earlier one where Love himself blurted out that there were British active duty servicemen helping with targeting with missiles. And it's one of those things that, you know, was known for a long time, or at least speculated on for a long time. You have all these weapons. Some of them take 6 months or 12 months of training. You know, there's no way they sense them without advisors, without maybe even people on the weapon systems themselves. So that was widely suspected. You know, I think that's the first time it's actually been admitted so far. So that's still, it's significant, but at the same time, it's not a surprise. I mean, I think every war, whether it is the Soviets in Korea, or the Germans in World War I and the Ottoman Empire, you know, every large weapons shipment comes with people. You know, it's a little disingenuous to say that they don't.
Wait, Soviets in Korea?
Yes, Korea, Soviet pilots flying out of uniform. Essentially, they were volunteer pilots in Korea.
You mean right in 1952?
Yes.
Right.
Okay,
So what about
to give a little bit more context than that? This whole thing started on Monday, right? We had the Tuesday show, and that when the news cycle started churning out the reactions to the Monday big Paris conference to support Ukraine, which apparently was done on very short notice. The invites were sent like over the weekend. It was a very quick, hastily, panically organized something where Macron said, you know, let's just send NATO troops. It's an option. And even before that, there was the Slovak MP, Mr. Fico, who said this is insane. You shouldn't do that. And then one by one, all of the NATO countries, it's easy to list who went along with this shit. Then the people who said, no, we're not part of this shit. There's like pretty much everyone, including NATO's head Stoltenberg. But, you know, we still have Lithuania with 7,000 armed forces, half of them reservists, so half of Moscow police. And for some reason, the Dutch, the Netherlands said, we are keeping this. And everybody said, fuck no, we're not sending troops. 79%, that's 4 or 5 people of the French people said this is a ridiculous idea and we're not going to do this. And the panic started, and they started throwing stones just like they did in the old days. The French and the Brits, and Olaf Scholz was, well, we shouldn't talk about troops. You should send more guns. We sent a lot of guns, and you didn't, you bastards. And you have people there, and that's what Ian was referring to. And then the worst, like they had their knickers in a bunch or something. How the British say they got panicking, the Brits, especially Tobias Ellwood, deep within the military and intelligence. You know, that world in Britain, an MP said, you have committed, you know, strategic intelligence breaches, horrible information. And the same day, the Times had Sir Anthony Radakin, like an armed forces leader of the UK, saying, yes, of course, we helped them sink the ships in the Black Sea. Of course, we helped with intelligence and all that. Everybody knows this. And so we got to this absolute quagmire. Everybody in Europe is tossing stones at one another of, you know, who's going to go, what we're going to do, because they are facing, I think, a humiliating defeat. And it's getting, you know, very quick, very fast is how things are moving in Ukraine. And what do we do? And that's when we get to Margarita, who you called Margot, Margarita Simonyan's revelations.
Yes,
who's
Margot's
the
her
editor-in-chief
nickname. Yes.
at RT. So that's kind of the way the events flowed until this.
Yeah, a lot of people are asking the questions of, you know, Macron, who had for a year or so has been people saying the only rational, semi-rational voice in Europe, right?
Sure.
The only one that has been, and why he all of a sudden does this like out of nowhere, seemingly
Africa, maybe.
Yeah, maybe Africa. Yeah. And also people are asking why Scholz is all of a sudden seemingly more commonsensical. But, you know, like, I think, yeah, sure, Africa is a great reason for Macron. Definitely. Absolutely. But I think a lot of it, or a significant part of it, is just people in a panic without a fucking plan B. And they just like don't know what the fuck to do. And they're blaming each other and just going off the script all the time. And yeah.
There's a buzzword that we love is crisis communications. When there's any kind of crisis, whether it's a flood or a war, in the USA with Hurricane Katrina, that's when there's this kind of wake-up call that we realized our crisis communications sucked. You know, there were buses, you know, there were fleets of buses ending up underwater. You know, left hand's not talking to the right hand. So I think what you said about people just panicking is exactly. I wouldn't say this is a psyop or some sort of conspiracy or even a deliberate plan. It's just
I see it as
panicking,
organic
and
panic. Same.
Yes, it's just bad crisis because because NATO framework we haven't really used. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. We haven't actually seriously used the NATO framework before. It's always
As in Article 4. Well, they've used it in Yugoslavia and Libya. And,
they used and they invoked it after 9/11 too. But I don't think for an actual military operation, seriously. It was always, a coalition of the willing. It was never, I think, an actual serious conventional war like this. And they're not. I hate to say, none of these people are terribly competent.
No, they're not.
And they're not used to working well under pressure.
Libya too was under NATO aegis.
Exactly. Yeah.
I just want to add that I think one of the reasons they panicked over sending their own troops there is because they're already there. I mean, the number of mercenaries from Poland in the United States is extraordinary, and now we know that there was another reason for Russia going into the Donbass. That was the CIA had 12 stations right on the Russian border. Now, I would assume that most of those have been eliminated because the Russians have taken that territory along the border. But they've always been there. On Twitter, I would always say when a ship was sunk, a Russian ship was sunk in the Black Sea, that MI6 and CIA sunk another ship on behalf of the Ukrainians. And
that's pretty much admitted now. Yeah,
that's basically the truth. I mean, it was the last ship. It was stated publicly that that's what happened.
If you guys would have been following Carlo's Twitter, you would have already know that before Margot, revealed it to everyone.
Carlo has a Twitter. I need to follow him.
So, the challenge for me is always, how do I conceptualize these headlines, right? Like, how am I supposed to understand these headlines and put them in a broader framework? And that's the question. Is it like, is everybody, performing their scripted assigned role, or is it just chaos? And I think you guys are absolutely right. I think in this case, it's chaotic. There's no script. You have a bunch of people that are incompetent, stepping on each other's toes, gaffing, and not knowing how to deal with this issue. So I think that's exactly the best way to understand what's going on, as opposed to some kind of master plan that's, they've scripted out certain levels of escalation, and we're at this stage, and the script goes to this stage, to this stage, this stage, and then we have, I'm not sure that's what's going on. So
I love. Do you know what I love? One of my favorites was I read Macron's follow-up to all of this, and he said, "Well, we have this policy of strategic ambiguity, and if you look it up, it's being ambiguous, and not really involved in the war. It's not citing strategic ambiguity in the open. That's a fool's way of saying, you don't explicitly say what we're doing is strategic ambiguity. It's just such a stupid guy.
That's a good point."
Well, the problem is that I think this is actually true for both sides. The Russians had plan A, plan B, plan C, and so on. NATO had plan A, plan B, and plan C. So I think after that first 10 months or so, where both sides are far beyond the parameters of what they had planned for. And I'm not sure there's necessarily new long-term plans to replace the ones that expired in that first year. I'm not sure there's even a way to plan for it. It's like,
I don't think so either. You know what's curious when it comes to the timing of revelations? I read that's not in the cheat sheet, I read it today. The punishing terms of Russia's 2022 peace
Wall
deal.
Street Journal, yes.
Yeah, you've seen that. I mean, Wall Street Journal front page, and it was, very forgiving, I would say, in contrast to punishing. But they kind of lament how, they would have kept Crimea. Yeah. They're keeping Crimea. And, out of that, I saw that even the Sebastopol base and further north in Odessa, 2014, in Odessa, the Brits, they bought a lot of real estate, including military real estate there. So I understand their, what's the perfect word for impotent rage at all this. But I think they're finding there's not much we can do at this point other than outright, just issue war, which would be the death of, all of Europe. But maybe the perfect somebody might have some other thoughts, but the perfect contrast would be the Tell me what's the Russian version of the State of the Union address which Putin just gave?
The annual address, I forget the name. I watched that too.
Yeah.
Or snippets of it.
To Parliament and all that. I didn't watch
Yes.
because I hate dubbed over English, but I read the transcript when it was out in English and it was amazing. And maybe you want to talk a little about that. But
Can I ask Ian just a quick question before?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just it seems to me, I'm not an expert in what's going on in the Kremlin, but it seems to me at times that Russia does have a much better long-term plan, because when Medvedev says something like, "Oh, the SMO will finish by 2025,"
I think, well, that's a good question. And so I was going to say, there was this point I remember all the way back in 2022, Putin basically had a brainstorming, and that's almost what they called it, a brainstorming session with senior military leaders. And I think that was actually, because what I had heard, the grapevine was telling me, in the early days of the SMO that they've planned this out 10 months, best case scenario, it ends in 30 days. Worst case scenario drags out 10 months. So October is right around there saying, okay, we need a new plan. So I think they did. They had at that point they developed something that resembled a new plan, and that included, of course, the referendums, the partial mobilization, and everything else they've done since then. Hopefully they know how they're going to wrap this up. Optimistically, they have a way, and I do think that's true. I do think long-term planning, they're much better at it than us. We this whole time we've been thinking in terms of the 24-hour news cycle. People want results now. People want that viral TikTok video of the Russian army destroyed. We have to do that no one was thinking 6 months out, 12 months out, 18 months out. I think that's true, that it's going to end in summer 2025, I think, is when this is going to be over. That's my guess as well.
You've been making that prediction for a while, and we were going to hold you accountable, Ian.
Yes.
All your integrity rests
is based on that prediction. Yes.
I hope for your sake it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I want.
Go ahead. Sorry, I just want to add the Kiev authorities are fearful of summer breakthrough, which I'm thinking is going to be spring breakthrough pretty much as soon as Rasputitsa is over. So I'm going to be on record as saying it's going to be maybe a year earlier than you said, but time will tell, and we'll see what. We'll see.
I didn't expect that 60 billion to get so tangled up.
Isn't that amazing? Maybe.
Yes. Now, I do think they're being hysterical. I think they're exaggerating. Just like they were exaggerating with Russia running out of everything, I think they are exaggerating with Ukraine's situation as well, because just because that new spending bill is tied up in U.S. Congress doesn't mean they're not getting all this stuff from Europe. It doesn't mean these discretionary budgets that the DoD has are not still shoveling shells to them. I just think what's happened is Russia has a lot more.
Yeah,
now,
you can shovel a couple of thousand here and there. It won't change.
Exactly. So I think but I do think that they're not going to make it to 2025 unless they get something through Congress. I mean, because just their economy, just to pay people, just to pay their civil servants and pay their military needs external funding. They have something like a 40-50% month-to-month deficit.
Talking about frustration, maybe we should watch the video of Mr. Chuck Schumer blowing everything out of proportion after the U.S. passed basically a stopgap bill to stop the government shutdown, nothing for Ukraine. These are his words.
Made it so clear how vital this was to the United States. This was so important, and that we couldn't afford to wait a month or 2 months or 3 months, because we would in all likelihood lose the war. NATO would be fractured at best. Allies would turn away from the United States, and the boldest leaders, the boldest autocrats of the world, the Putins and the Xis, the presidents of North Korea and Iran, would be emboldened, thinking that the United States was this soft, fat country that lost its way and would take advantage.
Chuck the Schmuck.
That was Chuck the Schmuck in a literal panic of what's going on around the
That just makes me happy. It just makes me happy to hear those words.
Do you want another 25 seconds of being happy?
Yeah,
Sure.
love.
Why not?
I'll share just one more video. Today is the burial of Putin's main opponent, the opposition leader Navalny, the hero of the West, the reformer, the anti-corruption leader. And I've only seen this girl, Yolanda Navalnaya, as Biden calls him, in two places. One was Washington, and the second is in Brussels at the European Parliament. And this is what she shared with the Eurocrats there. And it's again, oh, come on, come back. There you go. We need Leo around for this. Hope the chicken's all right. This is what he said she said in 25 seconds to European Parliament.
It's been used. Weapons, money, sanctions, nothing is working. And the worst has happened. Everyone got used to the war. Here and there, people start to say, well, we'll have to come to an agreement with Putin anyway. And then Putin killed my husband, Alexei Navalny.
The short address. That's where things are at, and I think that kind of sums up the mood across the Atlantic.
Have a policy of, wasn't he for the SMO? I mean, he didn't oppose the SMO, did he?
Well, at that point, he was in jail at that point. But he didn't oppose taking Crimea back. That's true. He's always a very far right-wing nationalist.
So but was he outspoken? Did his organization, were they outspoken opposing what was going on and supporting Ukraine, or did they kind of just not even talk about it?
He was in jail most of the time.
Yes, I mean, he was still having his aides post to Twitter. I'll be honest, it's been a long time since I paid attention to anything Navalny said. I assume he was against, because it's true he did in the early days of his nationalist days, was all in favor of Crimea rejoining.
I would imagine he would have left it alone because he wasn't going to get support. It wouldn't be popular to, support Ukraine. That's not going to be a popular line to take. And so if you're a politician wanting to get support, you're not going to take that line.
At their funeral, they were shouting Slava Geroim, glory to heroes, that Ukrainian slogan. This was in Moscow, yes.
Oh.
This was at his funeral.
There's a new twist.
Yes. So
when was this?
The West here, that's today. The funeral is today.
Yes. There were clips of people shouting that glory to heroes at his funeral. So
I'm glad they're outing themselves, making it easy for the FSB. I mean, I appreciate that.
Well, it was an authorized gathering since it was a funeral, so there is free speech, apparently.
I seen some videos. I didn't hear the slogan, but a couple of hundred people in Moscow. How many million people live there? It really wasn't huge.
And there's this debate of how many were paid to be there too. I mean, you had the U.S. ambassador, you had foreign ambassadors there crying crocodile tears. You had some upset-looking protesters, and there's the debate how many were paid to show up. But I think it's a blip on the radar that everybody will have forgotten it. There was a very funny tweet I'd seen from Voice of America, the Russian edition of Voice of America, where they once again got Navalny's name wrong. They called him Boris.
Valalny something. I saw black like that.
Wow.
It's like everybody's forgotten his name already. It's amazing.
Shit, I should have prepared better because there's one clip which summarized this perfectly for me. Rosenberg, the BBC reporter who's in Moscow.
Yes.
I think Rosenberg, he was at this big speech of Putin's, and afterwards he went to interview people about why didn't he mention Navalny? What do you say to Navalny? And someone said, who's that then? It was a perfect encapsulation of who the fuck is that? That's the higher Russian circles,
Is xenophobia a big thing in Russia right now, Ian? I mean, is it?
Well, there was in the early 2000s, you had like the Slavic Brotherhood. You had a lot of far right movements and parties like that. Do you remember that little group of Russian freedom fighters that went into Belgorod? Think about a year ago now. Hitler's Hammer. Those guys.
Right.
Well, People's Republic was trending for 2 hours, then it was dead.
Yes, one of the guys on that band had been arrested and imprisoned for a knife attack in St. Petersburg, where it was completely random. He went up and stabbed 2 ethnic minorities, just went up and stabbed them in St. Petersburg, including a little girl. So That's the type of, and Navalny himself is up to his neck with those far right extremists. Very anti-immigration, very anti, Russia for Russia type of people. And those are the types of right-wing nationalists that the State Department is attracted to. That's someone you can, Navalny was saying that stuff back then. Then he changed his tune because he was being paid to change his tune. They said, we want you to work for us, but you need to be more liberal. You can't say that stuff you were saying earlier. So he changed his tune because it paid to change his tune.
Yeah, before that it was cockroaches, that's referring to Muslims in Russia. And after that, the liberal champion. Yeah.
Well, I want to tell our audience and the international people in particular is that xenophobia is alive and well in the U.S. It's the number one. The immigration is the number one concern of Americans right now. So, notwithstanding the fact that Biden has this bogus bill, and Trump is telling his people to not vote on it because it might be able to be PR'd by the media as a real palliative to people coming to this country, and till after the election, not to do anything until after the election, not vote on it, and so it's all being played with politics, and there's no talk about the solution. The obvious solution is stop destroying the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Too late.
That's not on the table. That cannot be on the table. That's not a.
There's bipartisan support for that agenda.
Structurally impossible.
That's not acceptable debate. But regarding the immigration thing on the U.S.-Mexico border, who's that one African American talking head on geopolitics circles? He's
Cornel West.
He's not a geopolitics.
No. The one of the guys that's been on the Duran and what's his name? He's in Chicago. He's ex police. He used to be a police officer.
Garland Nixon. Garland Nixon.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, he had a interesting, very sort of cynical, but I think realistic explanation for this immigration thing, which is that in anticipation of large-scale civil unrest, as U.S. economy further tanks, as de-dollarization goes, as these wars in Israel, in Palestine and Eastern Europe get worse, in anticipation of large-scale civil unrest, the immigrants are not allowed to have proper jobs, but they can be recruited into the military.
I saw that. There was a law passed saying you can become a citizen through serving. Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so what Garland Nixon was saying is that they're preparing for a force of repression built with immigrant armies who have no qualms about shooting U.S. Americans in the streets. So
it's pretty cynical. I love Garland. Garland is great. I highly recommend watching him. That's an interesting take.
Shout out to Garland. But I have to say, what's really positive about him, sorry for barking in the middle, we'll get back to Billy Bob, is that he is talking regularly to Jyoti Bra of the CPGB-ML, the British Communist Party.
I watched all of those.
Me too. And she's always telling her, this ruling party, especially in Britain, but the US, you have to understand how bloodthirsty and cynical they are. It's just amazing. And she's teaching Garland, and Garland is growing like a flower. I wanted to say that. Go ahead, Billy Bob.
Carlo, you had a rebuttal.
Just briefly, I doubt what Garland's saying has much merit. I mean, obviously the vast majority of people in the military now are white Christians, evangelical Christians, and I don't think there's significant numbers of these immigrants joining the military.
Having spent time in the Army, Christian they are not. I mean. They might profess Christianity, but they're not Christian.
And every month there's a headline how they're falling below recruitment targets. There's a huge crisis. 77% of eligible military they just can't.
And this law was just passed very recently, though, right?
Yeah, this
I
month,
don't
last
know
month,
that.
February. Yeah.
Last month.
You know, I was
So the
in basic
recruitment
training
numbers.
with people that didn't speak English. So I mean, there's a long history of recruiting from, you know, South Korea, you know, the Central America. I mean, obviously Puerto Rico's a territory, but there was, you know, a bunch of Puerto Rican people. So, you know, I think there is a new law, but the you know, it's been going on a long time, you know, recruiting from other countries and having that to fast track your citizenship.
Yeah.
It's new, and I'd say it's not. You know, I would say it's his take is overly cynical. I don't think it's. You know, I do think there when Democrats and Republicans support immigration for somewhat different reasons, but I would say they see it as a source of stability. And the reason I say that, like, I'll give you an example. Like, you'll meet a lot of immigrants, like in Moscow, especially like taxi drivers, and a lot of them will tell you that they tried to get a green card in the USA, but had been denied, so they went to Russia instead. You know, so you have a couple of different reasons for why does a person want to immigrate to a more affluent country. It's you know, I'd say it's two. There's a short-term reason and a long-term reason. If you're just going for the short term, you're going to go there for a few years, however long you can, save up money, send it back to your family, then eventually go home. And then there's other people just say, you know what, I want to get in on this affluence. I want a nice house. I want to work hard. You know, there's the two big groups of immigrants. That's their motivations for it. Now, if you are an immigrant in, say, New York City, and you're a taxi driver, and you're just here to save up your $300 a month to go back before going back to Honduras or wherever you happen to come from, if you have this unrest, if you have a lot of people riled up, oh, we're going to strike, we're going to block the roads, you're probably not going to participate in it. It's like, dude, I'm just making my $200. I'm just squirreling away my $200 a month. I do not care about this. You know, it's so I think that from the perspective of U.S. Congress, from the perspective of Wall Street, they see immigrants as not participating in it. It's if anything, a stabilizing influence. If I'm explaining, I don't know if I explained that.
I understand. Yeah.
Yes.
Also, an undercutting of wages because menial
Yes.
jobs, as you said, that people won't do, they will do for less. Yeah, makes sense. And I love the performance. Go ahead, Wilbur. Like, I remember when AOC got big during Trump's time, when they were locking up children at the border in cages, and she went there to do the crying, the performance. And now both presidential candidates, you know, Trump and Biden, the aged like dinosaurs, went down to the border to do similar, like shaking hands. Oh, he's in a wheelchair, doing this performance shit. And of course, it doesn't matter to the policy in Washington. Of course, it doesn't.
No, I do think it shows there are divisions solidifying around Trump, because when Trump went, he was greeted by the Texas National Guard and Greg Abbott, of course. And when Biden went, he went and talked to the Border Patrol, who are federal employees. So it was kind of interesting to see that split.
Okay.
I think it'll be interesting to follow El Salvador in this because Bukele, no matter what you think of his policies, has taken care of the gang problems in El Salvador. See how the immigration, see if it keeps. El Salvador is one of the largest immigration countries in
sources.
Central America,
yes,
with immigrants coming when there was the Civil War, when the FMLN and the ELN were fighting the governments, the corrupt governments, and the U.S. was funding death squads under Roberto D'Aubuisson, who shot Archbishop Romero as he was saying mass. That kind of criminality, just an extortion by the gangs, MS-13. There was a huge influx of Salvadorans, but now we can see whether or not that the thesis that Leo rightly said will not make it into the discussion among Democrats and Republicans in the mainstream here in the United States. See if it has any effect. What Bukele's done, he's locked up basically all the gangs.
Could be it has an effect. There was a statement by Maduro this last week. He said, just undo the sanctions and all of the Venezuelan refugees will return within a year. basically. Yeah, they just want a better life, as simple as that.
Yeah.
But since you talked about this, basically mercenarism, I have to say, from the Russian trenches, there has been a lot of videos and evidence of Colombian mercs being killed in Ukraine. So that place is still as very lawless. You know, most of the US aid throughout history went to Colombia. And there's your other use, I guess, for a destabilized
and then Colombia, of course, was a right-wing ally of the United States forever until the last election, where a pretty decent leftist seems to have gotten elected, and he's doing decent stuff.
Yeah,
Well, it's not new. It's not new either. When Blackwater was big in the war on terror, Blackwater was marketed as, hey, we have these good, high-paying security jobs. They're going to go to Americans. It's good employment, blah, 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 blah. What actually happened was they kind of went to the lowest bidders in Colombia, Latin America in general. That's and pocketed the rest. So, if you got a $20 million contract to hire, say, 100 security guards for an American base, you would just go as cheap as you could from Colombia or wherever else, and then you pocket the differences.
Capitalism ruins everything, even mercenary outfits. I wanted to take a moment and just thank everybody. I didn't appreciate anybody last week, so Spanish Fobs, thank you for participating. Todd, as always, from New Mexico, thank you so much. Shaniqua, you're a regular. I also saw Shaniqua commenting at that British guy. I forget his name.
Steve Sweeney, perhaps?
No, it is
the
his
guy in
name is
London.
Alex. I think his first name is Alex.
Oh, sorry, the Marxism Leninism Institute
that
guy. Yes, Shaniqua, great that you're following. He's wonderful.
I might be mistaken, but I think she was commenting on that one. Let's see.
Yes.
What else? Oh, we have Paulie. Thank you, Paulie. And Cha Shin had a very long thing that I didn't even read yet. He listens while he works. That's great. Clarifies things more. Okay. So, yeah, we appreciate that positive feedback. I need constant positive affirmation. That's what I need. So I really appreciate that, Cha. The other thing I was going to say was when we were talking about the leaders of Europe not having a script, I wanted to just, interject an idea. Part of their problem, part of the pressure that is on these European leaders is that they have to perform for their bosses, for the financial elites. The financial elites, that's who they work for. And so they are under pressure to prove that they're doing something. So sometimes in their vehemence to prove that they're doing something to help the cause, to help their owners, their bosses, they'll say things that are a little bit too, out there. What?
Too out there, I guess.
Too out there. Yeah. I mean, too provocative and too threatening, too saber rattling against Russia that just kind of crosses a line. And I think that's kind of explains some of these things that they're saying. They're under pressure to prove how much they're doing. So I just wanted to mention that. I know that was about 25 minutes ago, so sorry about that.
No, we can get back to
what
that.
What are we at here, Ben?
I just wanted to show that never in my life before have I seen Totenkopf, the Nazi symbol, with a Mexican sombrero. That's where my mouse is. That's just a brand new level for me.
That's a long standing. There's a very good Telegram channel which you should follow. Track a Nazi Merc. That's the name of it.
I've seen a bunch of.
And they track. They do a very good job of tracking. Anytime one of these foreign mercs pops his head up on social media or is seen in a photo, they do it. So that's with the sombrero. It goes back a while.
I thought it was a fun thing. First time I've seen anything like that. But if you want to get back to European leaders, we know Miss Meloni is speaking to Biden today for the support of Ukraine. And of course, they have to perform to their owners, especially Western Europe. It seems more and more obvious, but that's where the panic comes from. What if this whole thing comes apart? This is not what we were promised, I think, is the mood in Western Europe, while they're also facing this uprising from their farmers, their people who are not with them in this project. And that's why I wanted to contrast it with Vladimir Putin's speech. And I want to grab out this one part of it, which I said, the Western monopolies are crumbling. Meanwhile, we are building this financial system free of political meddling. We are building this new multipolar world, which is the absolute threat to people who got bloated and rich of imperialism. You know, in London, the city of London, they call it the Golden Square Mile or something like that, is basically servicing the plunder of the world. France, you know, many previous French leaders said, without Africa, we would be a third world country. And that is exactly what they're facing. And that's why if we never talked about second fronts, but apparently Moldova is being considered, and Transnistria. And then there's Nikol Pashinyan's land, Armenia versus Azerbaijan. But that place, Armenia, it's got French fingerprints all over it. And a lot of the people actually mention it. It was French initiatives, French, security services that want, you know, get out of the CSTO, get out of the Russian thing. We'll give it's like a revenge for all the shit they've lost, which all began, you know, February 2022.
I want to mention that, you know, I've heard this from a lot of Russians too. Is that there's a lot of I mean, I've detected this bitterness from British people, like, because, you know, I post a lot in Quora and, you know, other places. There's a lot of bitterness from Brits. From what I understand, is in the 1990s, Russia was this cash cow for London.
That was their preferred Russia.
That's where all the oligarchs went to park their money. And then after Putin came into the picture and made all that go away, that left London, that just left Brits very bitter about it, because that cash cow went away for the most part. It's just, there's a lot of resentment because it's a post-imperial Britain. It's an island. They don't have a lot going for them. So it's just that golden age of Russians parking their money in London went away. And they're really...
That's a great point. I think it's kind of true as well with Hong Kong. You know, when China absorbed Hong Kong, that really put the Brits out even more, which explains a lot of their venom against Russia and China.
True. And there's very lamenting headlines from places like the Financial Times of London, owned by Nikkei Asia, but it's, you know, London-based, saying, oh, I have to admit, this, I think it was Hong Kong this one. Hong Kong is over. For us, meaning his Hong Kong. You know, the HSBC drug-fueled bank paradise is over, and that is just wonderful to see. Now, if we get back to Vladimir Putin's Goliath speech, I love that this is not Gennady Zyuganov, the commie, who would have slaughtered all of these Western finance bastards in 1996, which I think he was legally elected, but it got meddled with anyway. And he said the heroes of Russia are the workers and the warriors, and also said that it's not these self-proclaimed class of parasites who in the 1990s did nothing but line their pockets, who deserve no, I don't have it in front of me, no respect or no recognition from society. Again, you see this shift, you know. I know he's not a communist leader. He's a manager of all Russians. But the fact that he's going this way, that he's going back to the Soviet traditional allies in Africa, in Latin America, like there's this, not Caribbean, sorry, 3 or 4 countries which I can't name, like, maybe Nicaragua, Cuba, South American countries where Venezuela, thank you. Lavrov was there to prepare the ground, and then Mr. Patrushev, the spy chief, went there. Yeah, we can protect you against meddling, the U.S. meddling that you have there. And it's going back to well, I would say Soviet tradition, but you know, Russians can just call it family and you know, traditional tradition. But I've loved this speech in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't really matter whether, you know, people in the Kremlin still have ideological sympathies or not. I mean, it goes to show that the policies of the Soviet Union made sense. And if you don't want to be raped up the ass, like, this is what you have to do. If you don't want your people bled dry, if you don't want your resources robbed, this is what you have to do. You have to form alliances with other people who are against the genocidal hegemony of the empire. So like, yeah, and also domestic policy, right? My friends in Moscow have been telling me, who are quite active politically, tell me that in recent years a lot of social policies, social programs, you know, sort of revitalizing those programs and rescuing them from the neoliberal onslaught in Russia. That there's a lot more education funding, a lot more infrastructure and a lot more healthcare programs like that, right?
Yeah, if you look at Mariupol, the case study, how it was rebuilt, it's not just the housing, but in between the educational systems, the sports, the public parks, everything is oriented towards basically the social needs, not the capital needs. That's how Russia is being rebuilt. And I love the fact that he lamented, I don't know if you caught this part of it, when he talked about building a new, I think, military economic elite. He said, he lamented that for at least 14 years, 2000 to 2014, he tried to build this liberal elite class in Russia, and they turned out to be absolute traitors. And he really was absolutely, I think, bitter about it. And that's why I think maybe now that the communists were right throughout all these years, not just Yuganov, but before then, about how these people work, how capitalism works. Maybe he's going to pay a whole lot more attention to these people. I mean, I look forward to the election results later this month. I don't think anybody comes close to Vladimir, but I really want like a greater presence for at least in the Duma of the communist wing, which is about 20% now, I think.
And there's a long view of history you got to take into account. Because what angers me the most is I know Chomsky was hedged on Soviet Union, but his phrase, the threat of a good example, applies there.
He said a lot of good things too, you're
right.
The
Soviet Union was under threat from its inception from the West, under every way, militarily, economically. Okay, so it wasn't allowed to thrive on its own. It had to have its own paranoia, which was well-founded. And that's just carried over now into contemporary Russia.
Exactly.
It just dawned on the West with this $280 billion they want to steal. If they steal that money, more people are going to want to enter BRICS. BRICS is going to have 150 members. I'm exaggerating, but if they keep doing that, it's just dawned on them. It's counterproductive.
It's seppuku. It's self-sacrifice, isn't it? Especially on the part of Europe, that seizure.
But Janet Yellen is promoting it, right? She's suggesting they go ahead and steal these 270 billion dollars of Russian assets.
Janet Yellen, the American Fed person, and Ursula von der Leyen, the Wicked Witch of the Europe, are the loudest, but also Borrell and Biden. Biden wants this urgently resolved at the G8 level. Apparently, there's going to be a G7 meeting, in Italy in June, and he wants this resolved by them, meaning the theft of the assets. But the Russians responded in very cold fashion, saying we can do the equal and we won't hesitate. We have probably more assets of yours than you do ours. And, that's just goodbye Europe, because 90% of these assets are in Euroclear in Belgium. No one will, it's not in the US. And the US is pushing this, while France, I think to some extent, Germany is trying to resist this push.
Well, it's very shrewd because, like you said, I think it's actually more than from what the numbers I saw, only something like 5 billion is American dollars,
like accounted.
Yeah. Yes. So the rest is just the euros. And so that's going to hit. So it's very shrewd. A lot of people have been saying this from the beginning, that the European Union is just as much of a target as Russia itself, breaking down and deindustrializing the EU. And so that erodes trust in the euro, not the dollar, the euro. And the other problem is that these Russian assets are not liquid. So if they essentially they're not even taking money out of Russia's pocket. They're to liquefy assets, taking money out of their own pockets and giving it to Ukraine. So it doesn't affect, because those assets were not liquid. Giving liquid assets to Ukraine is just.
So that explains why Biden and Yellen are all for it, maybe, because.
Yes. And why Germany and France are pushing back against.
This is what the world is learning. I love this headline that Taiwan leadership is very worried that the US will abandon Ukraine. You have to learn this, that they don't care about Ukraine, about Taiwan, and about Europe. They don't care about the well-being of European people. And if the whole thing goes up in flames for America, that's kind of a solution. That's what people, I think, are learning through this SMO. Sorry, back to you.
And well, what I would say is, who really, really, really doesn't care about Taiwan or Ukraine or Europe?
John Bolton. Who else?
Donald Trump.
Yes.
Like I think, they kind of had the same policy, but they hate Trump because he's upfront about it. At least Biden pretends that he cares about them, while he's stabbing in the back. Trump is going to be forthright about not caring about them. That's kind of why he's more of a liability.
True. The Associated Press ran a long article by some legal experts saying, this is what American leaders should have told Europe decades ago. You're on your own. You got to pull your own weight. You got to. Yeah, it's got people here terrified. Really, the leadership in the EU and the European parts of NATO are absolutely terrified. I think I called it in last week's cheat sheet the abandonment syndrome. It's real. It's deep. Like shit. What if they don't? The aircraft carriers and the B-2 bombers don't come to the rescue? Whereas a lot of people like Lithuania still think they are.
And that also has a long history, because it's stated very clearly in the Project for a New American Centuries, 1988, 87 page synopsis of their plans, that one of the plans is they fear the EU's economy outstripping the American economy, and they want to destabilize it. And I just watched a very interesting documentary on Danny Casolaro. I don't know how much of our audience knows Danny Casolaro, but he was a journalist who was tracing the octopus, what he called the octopus, which was a whole bunch of nefarious schemes around the 80s. The October Surprise, Iran-Contra, BCCI, all of those, everything that people like me who was working with the Christic Institute were familiar with on a daily basis. And he was murdered in a West Virginia motel or hotel. He was stationed in Washington, and he went up to visit this source, and he was brutally murdered in his hotel room, and it was declared a suicide. It's a very interesting documentary if people get a chance to watch it. It's about Danny Casolaro primarily, and all of these plots that they had have ramifications today. The October Surprise was when Reagan sold arms to Iran, and in exchange for the release of the hostages, and so he could get elected. I mean, a half hour, 45 minutes after Reagan was elected president, that piece of shit, the hostages were released. And the people around him were just enormous hawks and liars and pieces of shit. So anyway, I just wanted to recommend that. And
so when you talk about tentacles and the octopus, you're talking basically intelligence services, CIA, that sort of crap?
Well, the CIA was certainly involved. It was just eight different scandals that were flowing around each other.
In the 1980s.
And the only one I wasn't familiar with, that they were using a small Indian reservation to launder all kinds of money and drugs. Mena, Arkansas, where Clinton was allowing drug flights to come in and unload drugs right in Arkansas.
Well, when we talked about Colombia earlier, and we talked about Archbishop Romero getting assassinated, like all of that ties in with all the cartels, all the dirty wars, the ruining of Central and South America, the impoverishment, the lack of development, resulting in this immigration crisis. All of that is done by the CIA. So the drugs, fund imperialism. And there's a huge off the books budget associated with the global drug trade that benefits the West and allows them to do all kinds of things, all kinds of nefarious, evil things around the world to maintain, Western hegemony, so to speak. What other topics? There's so many.
Which is dying as we speak. I want to react to this a little bit because I'm reading Halford Mackinder, who was the originator of, Heartland theory, Heartland and the Rimlands, and basically ocean-based power that Britain had first and US had first. The one thing that terrifies them is a unified Eurasia. And just as you mentioned, drugs, who are the two absolute anti-drug countries in the world? Ian is in one of them. There's zero tolerance, and China is the next one. where I saw a police officer doing like a spoon of sugar and saying, if this is heroin, this one gets you 5 years, this much gets you 10 years, and this one gets this much gets you killed. There's zero tolerance for this. That's the drug aspect of it. But back to the Mackinder theory. I mean, this whole thing about I just read that some Western news leaked or found that there was this plan, what do you call it, the gamed out, where, war gamed out of Russia invading China. They're still trying to push that nudge between them, and it's completely impossible. They're one nation in every aspect, and if Germany were to join that, this is where we get back to Carlo's point, the first Secretary General of NATO, Lord Ismay, of course, a British lord, he said, and it is on their website proudly, that the function of NATO is to keep America in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. And it wasn't enough to just humiliate them and deindustrialize them through Nord Stream. Now they really want to go around Mr. Schultz and get them into a hot war with these fucking... what do you call them? Taurus missiles. It's always been, because that would threaten U.S. dominance everywhere.
Absolutely, and I just want to continue a little bit on the narcotics thing, because it's fun. Like, drugs are fun to talk about. Everybody likes to talk about drugs. But I mean, it's kind of those conspiratorial territory, but it's absolutely true. I mean, when I first went down these rabbit holes, it was a little bit like, okay, CIA deals drugs, okay, but if you trace the history, right? First of all, there's this amazing talk by James Bradley that I would like to recommend to everyone for understanding the narcotics trade in China and the first industrialized cities in the U.S. as well as England and many parts of Europe.
The old money came from there. I heard Caleb Maupin talk about this. Go.
Yeah, absolutely. The institutions such as Cambridge, Harvard, the paving of the streets, the building of the plumbing systems in the first industrialized cities, New Jersey, in the East Coast, was all funded by opium money. And this talk by James Bradley, author of the China Mirage, at the Marines Memorial Club, at official U.S. military space that he gave this talk, I would recommend to everyone. But anyway, the Skull and Bones, right, was the real illicit arm of the British India Company, of a major part of the colonial venture, and that never went away. It went even further underground after that, right? And there was this former LAPD guy who committed suicide later, who was a big, what's the word I'm looking for? But anyway, he exposed the corruption within the LAPD, which had federal CIA links as well. He had literal photographs of CIA planes bringing in tons of narcotics from South America and from other parts of the world as well. He had like proof, and he confronted the then CIA director publicly in a talk. And then a few years later, he
disappeared. Let me guess.
Yeah.
Of course.
Absolutely, it's amazing. I mean, he goes on and on about narcotics being the third, either the second or the third, if I don't remember, largest economy or like economic sector in the United States. Steel, oil, and then narcotics.
Now, the Opium War was preceded the Century of Humiliation, right? I mean, the British essentially forced China to accept their opium exports, right?
Yep.
And then a whole bunch of Chinese people obviously became drug addicted, and it was really bad for their society, and that resulted in the Century of Humiliation, which China is recovering from and has recovered from very well. But that's why they kind of have a high, like a little tolerance. They don't have a lot of tolerance for narcotics and drug dealing. So it's understandable.
Well, if you look at Afghanistan, what did the Taliban do in the 1990s? They
eradicated opium production, poppy production.
Yeah. And they did it 6 months after the US left Kabul, like completely reorganized the agricultural sector.
So
I just want to say, while that was going on, the Century of Humiliation, that's the bones of which was the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, known today as HSBC, was built on that. Also, the Carnegies and the DuPonts, the old US money fortunes, were built on that money. So yeah, interesting how that goes, you know.
Arlo.
Yeah, when
Yeah,
1/5 of Chinese population was addicted, the average life expectancy went down to 34 years.
Yes. I just wanted to mention Alfred McCoy's Politics of Hair in Southeast Asia, and this revised edition, like Ian pointed out, has a chapter on Afghanistan. And once we go down this rabbit hole, I mean, you can talk about many people that have exposed this stuff. Not only the Christic Institute and they brought it all together, a declaration of plaintiff's counsel. And they had 1,000 boxes of evidence. They went down to Florida to argue their case. This Judge Lawrence King took like a half hour with the evidence, didn't look at any of it, and dismissed the case because he was bought off. And another person who was like Danny Casolaro is Gary Webb. When he's talking about California, Gary Webb exposed Freeway Ricky Ross, this drug dealer in Los Angeles. And where the drugs were coming from Colombia, and through basically the same route that was used by the Contras,
Colombia again,
John Hall's Ranch to the United States. He also was murdered. He committed suicide by shooting himself in the head twice. Now, how you do that, I don't know how you can shoot your. It's the only suicide ever in the United States documented where someone shot themselves in the head twice. And I want to go back to Danny Casolaro because I say he was murdered because a detective, the lead detective. Now all of these people, all the law enforcement gets scared off because people are dying all around them or getting crushed, career-wise and everything. Danny Casolaro was supposedly committed suicide in the bathtub, and he slashed his wrists down to the tendons 8 times. And as the detective pointed out, he was a very smart guy. He said, if you slash your tendon, you can't do another slash. You don't have the mobility to do it.
Yeah.
So they're both murders. I just wanted to be very clear about that. If somebody looked them up, they're going to see on Wikipedia that they were both suicides.
I like that they're blatant and actually classified it as such, whereas with the Nord Stream, the Swedes and the Danes both stopped their investigation and said, yes, well, someone sabotaged it. It's mysterious. We don't know who it might be. We just don't know. It's the greatest mystery.
It's the power of ideology, the power of liberal capitalist ideology. Just absolutely, people disbelieve what they see with their own eyes. People disbelieve what they experience with their own family's experience. They deny, and in order to maintain this illusion of Western benevolence.
Right, and it's this propaganda apparatus. It's a global propaganda apparatus. They call it the mighty Wurlitzer, and it has the ability to shape people's opinions, dictate what gets talked about. So if we talk about Israel, we haven't talked about Israel yet, but they're just engaging in this genocide. They're just demonstrating for everyone that they're totally morally bankrupt, and all their talk of human rights is bullshit. But They don't care. They're like, Israel, finish it. And then guess what? We'll make sure that humanity moves on. Humanity won't even remember in a year from now. Humanity will forget all about it, and they'll be on to the next thing. And that's the power that they have, and they can rely on that apparatus, and they're confident in its power to keep humanity, distracted, divided, talking about something else, and to a great extent, they've been pretty successful at it.
Yeah,
here in the vassal state of Germany is maybe even worse than in the U.S. itself. People are just absolutely, passionately, emotionally, deeply invested in U.S. Democracy and freedom, and it's just absolutely.
I agree, by the way, with Billy Bob that I think this power is crumbling. The U.S. is in splendid isolation, especially at the UN level. They just vetoed all alone 14 against 1, it wasn't a resolution, it was a statement to condemn Israel for what is now called the Flower Massacre. I don't know if you've seen videos. I'm sure as shit not going to share them. But yeah, the convoys of aid came in, people hungry, absolutely going to get some flour. They were shot and 100 of them were killed. And I opened the American, I don't know.
500, no?
Sorry?
500 wounded.
500 wounded. Yes, you're right. Over 100 dead. And this is the first time I've seen a human body being ran over by a Merkava tank. I'm also not going to show that. It's one of the worst pictures I think that will ever be in history. It's there with the young girl in Vietnam who got napalm. Absolutely horrific. And I opened the U.S. main New York Times, Washington Post, and I don't know, like a third one. Taylor Swift, Trump, and Navalny. That's it. That's the front fucking page while this is going on. You know what? And also the performance. I mean, Jordan, I can certainly understand they don't have a border with Gaza, only with the West Bank. But Egypt flew over to drop in, mostly to the sea, aid when they have a fucking border crossing, Rafah, that they control, where they can just send in aid, and they don't. Instead, they're doing this performance stuff. Look, we're helping. It's disgusting. While this real massacre is going on. Go ahead.
And there are photos. I saw photos today of the Israeli protesters blocking aid shipments into.
That is a war crime.
And the thing is, there were literally in that photo there were only 5 of them. There were 5 people, not even in the road, and that's enough. So it's cooperation, because if Egypt wanted to get supply, like you said, if Egypt wanted to get supplies into Gaza and did it forcefully enough, they could. But everybody, the Arab League, the USA, NATO, are all in bed with Israel. They cannot do it without their help.
Yeah, and Biden has some rough words of warning to the Israelis, but keep sending the bombs, keep sending everything. And now he says, well, it's delayed, the ceasefire we had, which only had like 100 trucks coming in each month if the ceasefire for 2 months were upheld. And that's about 1/5 of what went in before October 7th. So
Leo, how is it going to end in the Middle East? What's your take? Like, is it going to expand? Is Hezbollah going to get involved? Is Iran going to get involved? Is it going to be a regional war, or?
It succeeded all of my expectations, because after the October 7th attack, I speculated that
couple of weeks.
That, right? It was going to be a few weeks, maybe a month. Well, what really astonished me was the overwhelming. Well, one, because we knew about Israel's military ineffectiveness. They just cannot. They're incapable of ground combat at that point. They're beyond. It's not the IDF of the 1960s anymore. It's very much a very ineffectual organization. But I completely understand how just everybody is in bed with. So it doesn't matter if they're bad at ground combat. They can just lay siege to the city, kill everybody, and get unlimited quantities of munitions, and everybody is a participant in the genocide. And there was a new UN report. I think it was 2 days ago, if I remember correctly, that almost 600,000 people are at famine level.
It's a famine. Yes.
And it's the worst one. It's worse than Leningrad. So it's the worst. It was literally worse than any local event in the Holocaust. So literally, it's some kind of an amazing statement to make that Israel did something worse than Hitler in the Holocaust.
And they did.
All of what you say is true. But another thing is also true, that none of it is sustainable.
Yeah, true. It's good they're using different munitions than Ukraine, because we can get bombs from the US, but even that is finite. Go ahead, Leo.
Even that is finite, and Biden just made a statement that maybe we should think about immediate ceasefire or stop sending arms or something. I mean, but geopolitically, the entire region is turning against the U.S. and Israel. The people, I mean, these leaders, even in Egypt and the vassalized West Asian states, cannot lose the respect of their people, or they cannot lose, or they will lose power. So these regional alliances are forming. Not in a frivolous way, but like forever, like for good.
That's how I see it too. This is
turning against imperialism.
Russia and Israel, had a special relation, not tied at the hip, but kind of, okay, we'll let you do this. they have divorced at the UN level. They are tossing shit at each other. Israel is sending like drone detection systems to Kiev and saying Russia is part of the destroyers of the world. And Russia is saying, look at these people, they're child killers. We're talking about 30,000. It's past 30,000 and 25. A quarter of 100,000 are women and children. That's where we're at. Okay. It's unseen anywhere in the world, in history, this slaughter.
Well, I disagree with the. Well, I mean, one I'll point out that it's true. If you talk, you could talk to 1,000 Russians on the street, and I think just about every last one of them would support Gaza over Israel. I think it's a true statement. I think that divorce is grassroots.
I think so too.
But I do think it's sustainable. I think the plan is to kill, not displace, kill all 2.3 million people. They're doing it in a very calculated way. They're not doing it all at once. They did that calorie count. They're doing it enough so they can get away with it and just gradually eliminate 100. It's the worst genocide in human history, I think, is what Israel is planning. It's completely intentional, and I think they're going to get away with it.
And a lot of the population says we haven't done enough. We completely agree with what the government, the government is doing in Gaza, but we haven't done enough. Erase the Harabis and put new Disneylands and real estate there. That's what's horrific to me, that this doesn't come just from Netanyahu. It's being groomed throughout the centuries. And I want to add that everybody's hero for many ages, Norman Finkelstein, I was in an interview with someone, he named the 3 true recipients. If the Nobel Peace Prize actually meant something and it wasn't for war criminals like Obama and people like that, he named it would be number 1, I think, the South African delegation. Number 2, the doctors in Gaza who stayed even after the attacks, and number 3 was the Houthis in Yemen. And I think that's the 3. Kudos to Mr. Finkelstein.
Yeah.
Those are good choices. I'm not sure I agree with Ian. I mean, I think what Israel wants to do is they want to force Jordan or Egypt to take these refugees.
The IMF is working on that. Yeah.
On these governments to absorb the people, and because Israel would much rather do that, but that's kind
here's the thing. Here's the thing about famine. We're at the point of no return. Even if tomorrow the Gaza Strip was flooded with food, it would be too late for probably about a third of them, especially children, because they would just be permanently crippled. You can't be at famine levels of starvation for weeks and not have permanent consequences. So I think the plan is to kill them. There's no reason to doubt that at that point. They're just going to kill them.
Sure.
I think it doesn't make a difference in Tel Aviv.
We don't disagree about that. That is the intention, of course. It's a genocidal, racist, colonial states from the beginning, and that was their intention for decades and decades, and now it's their chance. But whether they will be able to get away with it, whether they would be able to finish it, and whether they would be able to get away with it, is another question. I mean, Hezbollah can destroy Israel.
It can.
Like immediately, like within a few weeks.
Look at what the Houthis did without a navy. Hezbollah is 10 times that. And then there's Iran, 10 times
even
Hezbollah.
more. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the regional alliances and the international focus is now on this genocide. And I don't know. I'm not saying that you're necessarily wrong, but I would like to believe that things are changing.
I think so. There's permanent repercussions. One of them, everybody's favorite, Friedman, the asshole at the New York Times, ran a headline saying Israel has lost, let me just find it, its greatest asset, acceptance in the world. And, last time we spoke, China came out as the number 1 diplomatic power in the world. And everything I see from Baidu and Bilibili and the Chinese social media is in support of Gaza. They basically turned... who we talked about last time, Aaron Bushnell, Harun al-Amriki into an angel, a burning angel hero. And the public opinion, even in China, is completely against this. I mean, they've been under the boot. They know the history of the century of humiliation. And if everyone's against you, the US alone, which is waning in power, like visibly, globally, is not going to be enough, I think, when everyone's against it. Can I take this opportunity to piss a little bit on the German Navy? Because that was one of my favorite stories this week. It's way down on the list. But they sent the little frigate, the Hessen, into the Red Sea. And the first thing this fucking thing did was attack an American MQ-9 Reaper drone with 2 missiles, and both of them had malfunctions and were tossed back into the sea. And the headlines were, horrible, humiliating, all of that stuff, a shame for the Navy. And yeah, there's that. And while the British, who couldn't get 2 of the aircraft carriers to just move, are now selling one of them. They're selling one of them. These are the people,
Well, the amazing thing about the German incident too is because there was American fault in that.
It's a friend or foe glitch, wasn't it?
Well, no, because what happened was they flew the drone with its transponder off, which is not something you're supposed to do when you're working with partners. So they Germans correctly identified this object, didn't know what it was. They asked the Americans, "Hey, does this belong to you?" The Americans said no. They said no, it's not ours. And so at that point, Germany again correctly fired their missiles at this object, as the Americans had denied it belonged to them, and missed both times. So it was
another fun wrinkle to that story in a sub-level, not the tight or the belt, but some level Blick or something like that. I read that 2 of the 3 types of missiles that would be supplied to the Hessen are out. They're just not in stockpiles anymore. So that's, again, the finite nature of what they can do is on display. Billy Bob, sorry I interrupt you all.
Well, I was going to just go back to Israel and kind of, the script that the West is kind of writing about, that their narrative is that, it's Netanyahu's fault, right? So everybody's against Netanyahu. Friedman in that op-ed you mentioned was blasting Netanyahu. So he's kind of being a scapegoat. I don't know if that's anti-Semitic to say since he's Jewish, but that's exactly what they're creating. Is they're making Netanyahu the fall guy, and they're giving Zionism a free pass. They're giving the entire population of Israel a free pass. They're giving themselves a free pass by putting all the blame on Netanyahu. And I think, and then they're just trying to enable him to get away with as much as he can get away with, and he doesn't mind. He doesn't mind playing that role. So this is the kind of theater that you see being created by the media. And, to what ends? Like, how long is Hezbollah? How long is Iran gonna, just sit back and watch the destruction of the Gazans? I mean, I'm not sure. And I think they're explaining what their red lines are, to the West. And I don't think the West is interested in a regional war either. So hopefully it comes to an end very quick. And, we see an end of the suffering. But I don't think, the future is uncertain. Like, I don't think anybody knows exactly how it's going to play out. I don't think Biden knows. I don't think Netanyahu knows. I don't think Iran knows. I think it's still to be figured out.
I'll share with
bigger trends. We can look at the bigger trends and make educated guesses. But anyway, go
on. I'll share with you a conversation I had on Facebook yesterday. So there's this British person who followers with on Facebook, and he shared this meme, complaining about, Israel being mean to the poor Palestinians, and I was feeling kind of angry about it. So I commented, there is no point whining about what Israel is doing to Gaza while you still support NATO, which is the global power structure that makes what Israel is doing possible. And he's like, "Oh, no, that's not true." This is literally what he told me. He's like, "I don't support the Tory government. I vote for Labor." And it's just
Keir Starmer. That's very different.
Yes, I will vote, and that will stop the genocide. It's unbelievable.
So
it's that's the attitudes that I think is just, and that's why the genocide is going to.
Yeah, that's another unsustainable thing is the cognitive dissonance. I mean, at a certain point, the collective total cognitive dissonance, the taxation on that, because it's taxing on your psyche, on your mind, on your heart, on your body, is not sustainable either. I mean, people, how do liberals? I mean, here in Germany, it's just so terrible. There are plenty of leftists who support Palestine, but talk to an average liberal, the most you will get is, well, it's complicated. Both sides are at fault. It's an ancient religious conflict, tribal.
You remember Cenk Uygur from the American TYT network, Cenk Uygur? TYT. Anyway, he said.
I don't watch TYT.
Me neither, but I did back in the Bernie days, and he said it's all about the different people with different sky gods. That was the worst take I've ever heard on this. Yeah.
Fuck.
Well,
Fuck me.
I want to say several things, but Jen Kwieger, you brought
Leo.
that up. I watched Norman Finkelstein talk with this young British kid. I think his first name is I think Ira. I'm not sure, but anyway, at the end of the discussion, or actually, the kid asked Finkelstein if he wanted to argue, if he wanted to debate Cenk Uygur, and he said, "No, this guy's just in it for the he said he's not familiar with computers, but for the likes and the larger numbers of viewers and that sort of thing." And I agree with Leo. I know for a fact that the elites here in Washington and the media, they don't care how many Gazans are killed. If they're all killed, they don't care. I'll give you one example. Watching CNN and this travesty that happened with the flower that people rushed for the other day. We're watching it. The first, they're talking about it in reasonable terms, and then they begin to blame it on the Palestinians. The Palestinians panicked.
So angry.
The trucks
stampede.
ran over
the
them.
Israelis used the word stampede as if they were animals.
Right, yeah. And then the real thing that then they said, and the reason that the Israelis shot these people, the Zionists shot the people they did shoot, was because they felt threatened by a hostile group that was approaching them. So that just goes to show you they don't care. And I want to mention at least one thing, or I want to mention two, because if I don't, Rosalie will smack me on the head.
We don't want
one
that.
Is, and I'm going to back up, is that NATO originally had many Nazis in high position in NATO. So that's something she beats me over the head with every day.
So did the EU, by the way. Yes.
And the other is that Israel sees itself as potentially becoming a world energy power because of the offshore resources that are not only off the shore of Gaza and Israel and Lebanon, but in Lebanon, those three, and they want to eliminate Beirut as a viable port. Gaza has no viable port, and they want Haifa to be the line where all that energy flows. And and also they want to build
to Europe
pipeline.
to subsidize
They want to build a pipeline which would be materially shortened if they had access to Gaza, and that's what they're after. So the people Leo's right. They'll murder as many as they want. They'll go, there's only 1 million left. You take some in Jordan. You take some in Egypt.
Makes no difference to them. And I think Cho Shin's question can be answered the same way as I wonder who blew up Nord Stream, At that same time.
It was an accident with the manure in the warehouse.
Can I do a quick shout out to Mr. Richard Medhurst, the lion cub of Damascus, who did a 2-part short documentary on the economics of what Israel has in mind around energy, which is unparalleled. Fantastic.
I want to answer that question with Cho Shin. It was the Mossad, the CIA, and MI6 that blew that up.
Okay, now, Leo, again, sorry, we all had these raging thoughts, but back to your point that it is emotionally, mentally taxing to be this liberal. This is still in self-defense. Imagine saying that while seeing these pictures. I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry. I just wanted to interject.
No, it's fine. Just the denial of reality. I mean, speaking of the pipeline, what pipeline? Pipeline is Putin propaganda. Like, what? It objectively happened, you say? You can't fool me with that Kremlin propaganda. This is lies. Like, it's not worth talking about. That's literally the average person here in Berlin. That's literally, you bring that up. You bring up Nord Stream, people will be like, oh, you're a Putin puppet. Like, immediately. Like, they don't want to, it's impossible. I mean, the level is just, absolutely astonishing.
And that was last year. Now ask them who won World War II, and then you go back to when all this distortion began. And I
have
that
a
Russians talk
question.
about.
I have a question actually, because I want your perspective from Berlin, because it seems like just looking at social media, looking at both Europeans and American coastal liberals, it seems like everybody was Slava Ukraini, but then that offensive, that loss, that L, just killed all enthusiasm. Like it's just losing. No one likes a loser. Like I just saw all of just the mainstream, not particular. I mean, there's still those echo chambers of super political people who talk about Ukraine, but it just seems like the mainstream average person has just stopped caring about Ukraine. Do you think that's true in Europe and Germany?
It is true. A lot of the flags that were hung out of balconies and windows here in my neighborhood have gone. Most of them have gone. There's still a few left. And looking at the polls, right? The polls of Germany, many different polls all say that enthusiasm has waned, and people think that there should be a negotiation and settlement to end the conflict and all of these things. But I think it doesn't mean much more than that people are losing enthusiasm for the war. It doesn't mean much more than that. People still are absolutely beholden by the entire ideology of imperialism and the benevolence of the West, the benevolence of the USA. We need the US here in Germany to protect us from the evil Russians. And people, it's very clear. If you just look at media portrayal of Mr. Putin and of Russia, in the last 5 years, and also China, it just went nosedive, right? From the media machine. And before that, it was positive, or like not nearly as slanderous. And people just absolutely cannot remember 5 years ago, and they deny what their own media said 5 years ago.
Yeah, and this goldfish no memory thing is very, very European.
It's amazing. People deny what Haaretz published about Israel. People deny that. If you say that in Germany, you get arrested. What Haaretz
or what the Guardian spoke about Ukraine before 2022. Huge documentaries about the Nazi problem. Gone. Memory hole.
And there are a lot deeper historical reasons why the people of Germany maybe particularly follow the leader, follow their horrible, really fucked up governments all the way, even when it's no longer makes sense, or that it no longer
tell me
is tenable at all.
Tell me why.
People, okay. The larger historical reasons is that this area was devastated by the Counter-Reformation, and before that, the 30 Years' War, of course. I mean, and the larger perspective is, of course, after the fall of Rome, this area was in constant war for 800 years, right? So people just die for any stability. People will give their children for any kind of stability. They don't care what kind of stability. They just want a little bit of stability. Like, please, I just don't want to think about it. Like, please, let me just live my life. I mean, what's his name? The German playwright, the communist playwright who wrote the song "Show Me the Way to the Next Whiskey Bar," Bertolt Brecht. He famously talked about the historical origins of the German petty, Spießer. That's the word for it. This sort of petty, following the rules. We must obey the rules. Mentality of always absolute trust in the state, absolute just blindly following the government, whatever the government is. He located this phenomenon, particularly German phenomenon, in the Counter-Reformation, where Rome came in and just killed anyone who dared to voice an opinion.
That's why I asked you about truckers. Sorry, not truckers, but farmers, because when the German farmers riot, that's serious. That's not like the French farmers who will riot, basically at the drop of a coin. That's something serious. because Germans don't like to go against the government, do they?
True. I mean, there's all these jokes, right? Karl Marx famously said, like, people who waits at the traffic light when there's no cars passing because it's red will never have a revolution. And Lenin supposedly said, the people who the Germans want to come to the revolution, but they must wait in line to buy a ticket first.
Yeah.
Mr. Doherty has a good point. What's the quality of this knowledge of the people you're talking about? Here in the United States, it's very low. I was watching I don't know what it was, but this reporter was asking Trump supporters standing in line waiting to hear Trump speak what they thought of Ukraine and Putin, and they all said we're for Russia, we're behind Russia. And then the so-called journalist, the guy with the microphone, goes, "Yes, but he invaded Ukraine, and he's killed thousands of people." And not one of them, and I know they might have edited it out, but not one of them brought up the Minsk Accords, the Maidan coup, the Donbass killing their own citizens since 2014. None of that. None of the people questioned. They just said, "I don't care. I'm still for Russia." So it was like, because they perceived Trump as being more sympathetic toward Russia, and I guess to a certain degree they're sick and tired of being led around by their nose, and their kids are getting deployed here, deployed there, that sort of thing. But Mr. Doherty is right on the money. It really, the quality of people, what people know here, is so low on all fronts.
I have a thought related to that, but I didn't want to interrupt anybody if somebody else had a more important thought to share.
I wanted to reply quickly to Leo, but you never get to. I'm sorry about this, but I wanted to say that, I mean, the early days of the SMO, we heard Annalena Baerbock say it doesn't matter what the German voters say. We are with Ukraine to the last, whatever, something, Miss 360. And I wanted to say, how much does it matter if public opinion is swinging, against Ukraine, or, the farmers are against Brussels or Berlin, when last count, I think it was in 2022, there's 35,000 US troops in Germany, scattered around 40 plus military objects. They don't like to call them foreign bases. So definitely an occupied country, which, as you said, in the psyche is, we need this. We want this here. I think that's not a sovereign country. And it's turned out to be, as you remember the revelations, they're going against Scholz, who said we are not sending Taurus missiles, while this military people, they're just going around him, going around the chancellor, That's not a sovereign country.
Well, I want to add an afterthought to what you just said, Ben. There is a very good book I read by, what's his name? Carl Stevenson, Medieval Feudalism. So it's a synopsis, kind of layman's understanding. Anybody can pick up this book and read about medieval feudalism. And, I kind of look at Europe now and I see kind of a feudalistic vassal, because that's what his book is about: vassals, knights, and just vassals in medieval Europe. And I see that mentality now. So it's like, they accept American leadership because that's the vassal mentality. They don't resent American leadership. It's just, I'm the vassal of America. The Americans are the leader. Washington is the leader. I'll follow along. But they resent an outsider. They perceive, I think that's that perception, that vassal mentality. They perceive Russia as an outsider. So even the
China,
relationship, the same as China. So even the relationship of Russia provides cheap energy and they pay for it. They resent that because there's that power dynamic of someone who is, if I'm selling you a product that's like a position of power, I can stop selling it to you. So they
resent themselves when they deal with an actual sovereign power who stood up to the bully. Yeah, there's a deep psychological. Sorry.
No. Yeah, that's basically what I was getting at.
And similar to, Billy, you go.
Yes.
Well, I was going to tie up everything, and I was going to talk to that point about the societies, Western societies, just being, mindless and uninformed and disenfranchised politically and not caring and divided and distracted. So, and my point is, my hope and my certainty and optimism for a brighter future does not rest on the ability of Western citizens to know what's going on, because I've kind of written those fuckers off. Sorry, guys.
I'm with you.
But China and Russia, the Russian Federation and Iran, they haven't developed a resistance based on that is effective based on the U.S. citizenry or European citizenry supporting them. So their resistance is
real, material.
Is real, and it's gonna be real regardless of if people in Germany or people in the U.S. understand what the fuck is going on. And so that's kind of where my optimism is in China's ability to just outplay the imperialists. Same with the Russian Federation's ability and Iran, and it's obvious that the West is in decline. And so if the Western citizenry doesn't understand what's going on, it's not going to change that. So I don't know. I was, there was a little bit more there that I was trying to articulate, but that was the gist.
No, you're right.
The bigger picture is absolutely true, but in the shorter and medium term, I think it does matter, because it does matter if Germany, the center of Western European economic power and political, outsized influence on the EU policy.
Yeah.
If, there's a possibility that Germany can wake up a little bit, I think it will make a difference.
Yeah, the citizenry can put pressure on the government and demand certain policies, or that other policies don't get enacted. So that's true.
That's what
Leo has
discussing.
First-hand knowledge, but what they call the far left and the far right, meaning AfD and Sarah Wagenknecht Union, like 60% of their program is the same, which is fuck EU, NATO out. I don't know if there's a third one, but anti-war in Ukraine.
AfD, actually, on their website, you can see they are pro-NATO.
Oh, that's
they will say all kinds of rhetoric. They will say whatever the fuck that gets them popular votes. But on their website, their official program is in support of NATO. So like people are fooled sometimes, but we need to be not just like Trump. These populist right, whatever they are, not explicitly fascist, but popular right. They are not sincere and they are not anti-imperialist. Like in the short term, a little bit. They push back. Like they want to get the discontent vote. They want to get the anger vote. Right. That's what they want. They don't. Yeah, they want Germany to become its own imperialist power. If they want the U.S. out, they want Germany to become the global hegemon. And they don't want to start war. If war benefits.
Last time that happened, that was World War One. Yeah.
Let me address Mr. Doherty again.
Oh, okay. Wait. We have a mini alert, I think.
I just look. I appreciate you saying we can never give up on the American people, but I have to say I'm an old man, and they long ago gave up on me. I'm so isolated now because of my views that I can't tell you how frustrating it is to be in the world and hear all this nonsense. I'll give you one example. I was on like one of these Zoom things with 7 other poets and a moderator, and somebody Zoom bombed the reading, and they were using my name in the Zoom bomb. So obviously they were hostile to me, and that's why they Zoom bombed it. They found out I was doing it. And so after we reconciled the Zoom bomb, we began a discussion about what they were criticizing me about, which was the Ukraine and Russia's invasion. And in the course of the conversation, which got heated, I pointed out that 27 million Russians died at the hands of the Nazis in World War II. You know what the moderator did? She looked into the camera and she goes, "Oh, Carlo, how could you say such a thing?" That was her answer to me. So
yeah. I mean,
they've long given up on me. I never gave up on them until they won't listen. They won't learn, and they won't make an effort.
yeah, I mean, it is very disheartening. I hear you absolutely. I'm just about giving up. Also, I mean, in the last a year or so, a sort of cynicism I can notice in myself has been growing. I've defended the working class all of my life, against accusations of their backwardsness and they're not. It's not their fault that they support the bourgeois ideology. It's because they're saturated with false consciousness for generations. It's not their fault. But recently in the last year, one of the highlights is even the communists. I was at a communist conference. I may have mentioned this before, but this leader of the DKP, of the Deutsche Communist Partei, just flat out denied that the U.S. funded the Nazis. That the U.S. funded.
Documented.
It's documented. I mean, it's the Standard Oil. There's energy supply to the Nazi war machine. The Madison Square, like 30,000. Like
Henry Ford.
Henry
Ford.
Yeah,
Prescott
absolutely.
Bush.
And in this conference, she literally called me a conspiracy theorist. Like even the fucking communists. When even the communists are like this, it's just like
I've got 600-page books on that with evidence from the National Archives.
Yeah,
which is right up the street from me. Jesus.
So I was going to say,
Carlo, Billy Bob, and Ian are also the American people, so I can't just.
In response to Todd, I thank him for holding me accountable because we can't give up. I mean, the struggle has to continue. Like, what else are we going to do? But you can kind of just intellectually realize that it's a big struggle, right? It's an overwhelmingly difficult struggle, and sometimes that can create cynicism. But honestly, I mean, it's our duty as revolutionaries to at least do our best to win over these people, as backwards as they may be, and we can't give up.
Absolutely.
And I don't give up. But sometimes I do get cynical when I think of just how the difficult task it is, due to, like you said, due to their propaganda machine and their ideas, generation after generation after generation of just being bombarded by this false consciousness kind of a thing.
And if we look at the reality of what's happening today, if we look at where these countries are, where the Western imperialist countries are, the time is now to build whatever class consciousness that we can, because the time we don't have a second to lose, because the time of revolution is coming. The time when these contradictions reach a breaking point, and they will be no longer like literally sustainable, and that time is coming very soon, in the next years, in the next maybe 3 years. Maybe
there's signs and portents.
But what do you do?
The revolutionary moment will arrive soon, and the time is to build now.
Well, I mean,
okay, Carlo, go.
I just want to say, how do you talk to people who don't make any effort to learn anything?
I would say relate to them on their experience of those contradictions. I would say start.
Well, they don't even know what the contradictions are.
Exactly, but relate to them on the problems that they face, right? Whatever it is, like whatever
the problems they face.
I
don't know where I can,
I can frame it in a Hungarian context. I know it won't be as useful to you, Carlo, as an American would be. But we only had 30 years of propaganda when everybody's going to be a little store owner, everybody's going to get rich, and for 30 years nobody got rich. And there's a lot of bitter anger, resentment, and the media is spinning it this way, that way. That's their fault, their fault, their fault. But if you actually talk to them, listen to their life story, you can very easily, I think, educate them on what really happened. It happens all the time, but you can't fall out of love with them and say, that's a reactionary, that's a bastard. That's what a lot of so-called left organizations do, and I think it's destructive. I'm done with the CPUSA, I'm done with the PSL, with these broad statements which don't actually look at the material reality.
Well, I don't know. It doesn't even touch them. I had another example, but it's gone out of my head. It's like you can't if you have no point of reference with these people. No point. That's right. That's what I wanted to say.
Well,
Look,
they're angry with the
watched
establishment.
I watched some other video, and it was a TV show, and it was about they wanted people to find Indiana on an American map where none of the states were mentioned, and they had quite a few people, like 8 or 9. None of them found Indiana.
I would struggle. I would struggle.
I wouldn't. Well, maybe because I'm on the East Coast, and Indiana's not too, it's in.
Could you find Idaho?
It's in the Midwest.
I could find Idaho.
Okay. People were pointing up Wyoming.
I've been doing this map quiz. I know where Indiana is.
So where do you begin with people don't have a point of reference like that?
I mean, have their hostility towards the establishment. And
Hungarians don't need to know the world map to know what happened to them. Same for Americans.
Well, what happened to them? I can't afford to buy that. Car.
Because while they were sold this American dream of do the hustle, get ahead, and you'll be rich, they were all robbed blind, most of them, while a couple of really big capitalists kind of spooling in the world's resources got rich on top while letting them decay and be druggies and just show them the infrastructure, show them the metro. That's why I'm not a Tucker Carlson fan, but that's why it was important for him to show Moscow,
Yeah.
But
so we've gone really long. Poor Ian had to take a break because we were not, we would definitely have gone overtime. Leo, I really appreciate your, what is that called? Contribution. Your contribution to this discussion. Thank you so much.
I don't want it to end. I've had too much fun, but go ahead. Signs and portents of a better future to come. Right now, as we
see, but I don't want to rush everybody off.
In splendid isolation, right? Russia just held the Future Games grouping, something with cyber and all that. 107 countries took part in that, the splendid isolated Russia. The Antalya Diplomacy Forum in Turkey is taking place with about 4,500 participants, around 40 heads of state, ministers, all that. Sergei Lavrov is addressing them, okay? Then there's the G20 meeting in Brasilia, right, with Lula's leadership. And the US tried everything to get like a communique, which just talks about Gaza and Ukraine, and they resisted. They said, we're not going to give that communique. There's a whole lot of this. The new world order it's right now taking shape. It's the foundations are there. So I'm saying it's changing so quickly. I wanted to end on a bit of positivity.
And another, just one positive note. Do you guys know about the capacity of the Russian military and the Chinese military to disarm nuclear missiles from the U.S.? I read something about that, but I don't remember very clearly what exactly it was. I read something about new technology that can disarm nuclear missiles flying from the U.S. within 2 minutes.
The Russians just tested I think the S-400 or the S-550. I don't know which one is the. It's a Greek name, not Poseidon, something like that. Anyway,
Sarmat.
Not the Sarmat. That's the attack system. This is an air defense system that can intercept hypersonics, which the US doesn't even have. S-500 possibly, yeah. So I've read a bit about that, but the US doesn't even have that capacity, which they can already intercept.
So all these are positive things.
Yeah.
Cause for hope.
Prometheus.
That's on the Western public, knowing what's going on, and that was kind of my point a little bit. Carlo, any final thoughts, sir, about the ninnies?
Oh, well, back to Mr. Doherty again. He said the public schools have been gutted. They have.
That's true.
It's true. It's true. And if you live in Florida, if you put something that they deem that the powers that be deem inappropriate, you can spend 5 years in jail and be fined $25,000. If a librarian or a school teacher reads a book to her students or puts a book in the library that's deemed inappropriate, she can be tried and imprisoned for 5 years and get $25,000 fine. So there's a huge pushback here, I mean, from the state on the people. And what you have to realize is the majority of those people in Florida agree with what the state is doing, taking those books out. And they go to city council meetings with ostensibly some of these books, and they read from them. And I can't determine whether or not they're actually in a library or not, or where they got them. But it is, it's hard to argue with these people. I'm a Lenny Bruce fan, so I'm for everything. I'm for saying if I say it on the show, we'll get demonetized. But Lenny Bruce,
we're not making any money, guys. I wish I was.
One of his books with every ethnic slander you can imagine, and he says this. His argument is just a word. So for me, those books were fine.
Yeah.
But for them, it wasn't, and they're the majority of Americans. I don't care, even if they're liberal, if those books were actually in a school library or read by a teacher, even liberals would be against them being in the school. That's how apparently to them salacious they were. So I don't really have any faith.
Yeah, Todd's got an interesting point about New Mexico being highest producer of oil and gas, richest state of natural resources, and yet 50th in education. It's unconscionable, but that's capitalism. I mean, New Mexico is it's a producer state. They're going to produce so the rest of us can enjoy the consumption. It's terrible.
I was just thinking, what would happen if the Cayman Island, nationalized all the wealth stored there? Instantly one of the richest countries in the world.
Yeah,
tax haven. But Ian, I think, is going to have the last word. I wanted to add two things, which are one of them is brand new. First one, farewell to Jacob Rothschild, and I think the obituary said financier, and the other one, philanthropist, who didn't get to see the end of his goddamn project in Palestine. And welcome back George Galloway, who just got voted in the by-elections in Rochdale. So she's back. He's back in Parliament in the UK. And best of luck to the Workers' Party.
Ian, I hear spazzing out. Any final thoughts before we let everybody pee?
No, I think that's it. I think it's good end of.
So I appreciate it, guys. We will reconvene on Tuesday, but thank you so much. And then thank you for all the viewers. We're at an all-time high in, not an all-time high, but for the program on live viewers right now. So I hate to end it, but yeah, we got to go. Thank you very much.